Hi there, it's Melody Brooke here, and I wanted to talk about some really important things today. The first thing I wanted to talk about, and if you'll give me a minute, I'm going to share this on my personal page because there's a lot more of you there. But, okay, is it going to show up so I can do that? No. Okay. Well, I'll have to share it later, I guess. So tomorrow is the day we vote. So I'm trusting that all of you are voting. I'm trusting that you will make sure that your friends all vote because it's a very important election, as we all know. No matter what your political views are, it's an important election. And I voted the very first day, I'm proud to say. And I'm hoping that you all have, at least if you haven't already voted, that you're rushing out to the polls tomorrow. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So there was some articles that came out today. I don't know if you saw them. I will post them afterwards. But they were about the couple of studies done that show that the impact of spanking kids is not good. That long term, it causes all kinds of problems for the kids. It causes, in some cases, the kids to be more violent. And I know there's a huge range in the types of spanking that's done, and a lot of people have been discussing that with me today on Facebook. But gee, I wish I could get this shared. I don't know how to share it, guys. It's not wanting to share. Let me see if I can. There we go. Maybe I can share it now. So there was. Yeah, there we go. I can share it now. Share to. Whoops, that's not what I want to do. Bear with me here. Nope, it's not working. And I also want to share it to my personal page, but it's not letting me do that. So anyways, let's talk about spanking. I did not ever want to spank my kids. It was something that I didn't believe in. Yet at emotional times, I did hit my kids a couple times. I regret every single time I did because I think it was done out of frustration and anger. It was not done out of any kind of real need to discipline them. Okay, maybe now I can share it. There we go. Okay. All right. So I believe that spanking is really, it's just something that we have learned over the decades, generations and generations of from our parents to our grandparents to our great-grandparents. It is a last resort that we now know is not something that you're going to want to do because it causes long-term problems. Now, I know that a lot of you will say, I'm just fine, I got spanked. And I know that's true. I know that a lot of people did, in fact, get spanked themselves, and like me, turned out okay. But what we won't know is how we would have turned out had that not happened. We don't know what our levels of anxiety would be. We don't know what our relationships would be like. We don't know how we would view ourselves, our self-esteem differently had that not been the case. I know that there were lots of things impacting me as a child, but that was one of them. And I know that's true for all children. I can look back at my daughter who was, while I didn't really spank her that much, she was treated badly by my ex-husband. And as a result, she's got a lot of trauma to deal with. And what I know now is that while it's many times done out of love, it's done out of a parent's, the only thing a parent knows how to do with their child. And so we do know that not giving the children limits is not going to be an option either, because kids get anxious and they get out of control and they do all kinds of bad things if they're not shown where the limits are. Kids need us to provide that for them in order to feel safe. But I also know that being controlling and trying to force a child through physical violence to do what you want them to do creates adults who think that that's okay. So they grow up and try to do that with their own children. They try to do it with their spouses. They try to do it with other people in their lives, and they get into trouble, which is what one of these studies today came out with, was discussing the fact that I'm going to try to post this again just to make sure it got posted on my personal page. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing it getting posted. Here we go. Share. Right post. Here we go. So when we talk about corporal punishment, there's a lot of variations, right? I mean, there's the little pop that you do just to sort of get their attention, and then there is all-out abuse where you're actually beating up a child, and I've had plenty of those people in my practice. And there's a lot of things in between. And when we start looking at using hitting as a way to control a child's behavior, what they learn from that is that hitting is an acceptable way to get people to do what you want them to do. And that's what we've learned, and that's what a lot of the studies are now coming forth with, is that treating a child with physical violence in order to control them, to contain them, to try to teach them to behave properly, actually creates the opposite result of what you want. I mean, if you think about it, children are no different than you are in terms of how they feel emotionally, right? In fact, well, they're more sensitive than we are. That I would say that, because a lot of us have grown up having to shove our feelings down so that we can get by in this crazy world we live in. But when you're a little child, you have these very open, vulnerable, alive feelings that are incredibly powerful. And when that's met with physical force, it doesn't go over well with the child. It actually causes them to shut down and become emotionally less available, which is not a good thing. But the other piece of that is that it begins to teach them that they don't matter. And if you think about it, you don't want to be told this. You don't want your boss to hit you. You don't want someone to control your behavior through force, through intimidation, through violence. So why would you think that that's okay with a child? A child is no different than we are. They're just little human beings in little bodies. They just don't know as much as we know. So we have to help them by guiding them and providing them with information, not by controlling them through physical force. Now, I do know that generations upon generations have done that, and that's what we think we're supposed to do. In fact, it's so ingrained, which is why I ended up hitting my kids a couple of times just out of an emotional, immediate, in-the-moment response. My old brain was just doing what was done to me. I'll never forget the terror of I'm brushing my daughter's hair, and I remember as a little girl, this happened to me all the time. My mom did this all the time. We were brushing my hair, and you can see my hair, it's like got lots of knots in it because it's got lots of curls. So I would fight her, and she would take that brush and pop on my thigh with the brush. So one time I was brushing my daughter's hair, and I was having it was a very frustrating day, as I recall, and she's fighting me, and I just instinctively went to pop her on the thigh with my hairbrush. Well, unfortunately, my daughter, being my daughter, stuck her hand down there, and the back of the brush hit her hand full on and just caused a giant welt on the back of her hand. At that moment, I was horrified because I did not want to hit my child. I certainly didn't want to cause her any kind of injury, and there it was. So what I know is that we do what we know, and it's really important that we learn to know something different. We've learned so many things about how to be better human beings over the decades. We've learned so many things about building buildings, about mechanical things and science and chemistry and biology and medicine. And yet, for some reason, we stick to these old school ideas about what it is to be a parent and to use the same methods of raising our child that were done to us, our parents, our grandparents, and generations before, thinking that's just fine. It's like, it's as if we're we're acting like germs are not a real thing. It's the same kind of mentality where, well, my grandparents survived without worrying about germs. My great-grandparents survived without worrying about germs. So why should I worry about germs? Because it makes a difference to know that germs cause illness, just like it makes a difference to know that when you're hitting a child, it's going to cause them problems later on down the road. I mean, if you really think about it, it's like your best friend has just slapped you. If you slap your child, if you hit your child on the thigh, the butt, whatever, it's like your best friend has just hit you. To a child, you are their world, you are their everything. And when you hit them, what you communicate to them is that your needs, your values matter more than they do. That you and your intentions matter more than their intentions, their desire, their heart, their emotions, their value as a person. And I know that's not what we want to convey to them. What we're trying to do is help them find, the guidelines. We want to help them know where the boundaries are. We want to help them become better adults so that they know how to behave in public, so that they know how to respect other people, so that they know how to do the things they need to do to get along in the world. That's what all loving parents want to do. And so I don't believe that most parents who spank are bad parents. I don't believe that most parents who spank are doing something deliberately to harm their child. I believe that you are doing exactly what you believe is the best thing to do. No doubt about that. What I'm asking you to do is to consider the possibility that there might be a better way, that because we have learned so much about human nature, we've learned so much about human psychology, we've learned so much about the way our brains develop, about the development of our children into adults. We have learned so much about that we now know what works and what doesn't. And so educating ourselves just a little bit about that topic is going to make a huge difference in how you raise your child. Now, I've worked with a lot of different clients in a lot of different situations, and unfortunately, most of the time when they come to me, when they're having problems with their kids, they've got years of doing things the wrong way with their child when they come in to see me. And so I have to try to help them reverse the damage, which is sometimes difficult to do. When you've spent 13, 14 years of a child's life yelling at them, hitting them, trying to force them to do what you want them to do, and that child becomes rebellious when they hit their teenage years, then it's a problem, because that child no longer has the kind of respect for you that you would want them to have. Now you think, sure, they respect me, they respect my force. No, that's not respect, that's fear. And what we want from our children is for them to obey us, not because they're afraid of us, but because they love us and respect us, and because they honor and respect the things that we're telling them as a parent, and that we do care about their well-being and that their happiness matters to us. But when we spent 13 or 14 years yelling at them and hitting them, they're not going to be so sure that that's the case. Someone's asking me how to view this, and it's on my LPC and LMFT page. I was trying to share it here. Let's see if I can manage to share it here on my personal page. It's not going to let me do that. Okay, I guess I'll just have to share it later. So if you are a parent and you're, like most parents, trying to figure out what the best thing to do for your child is, you certainly don't want to be one of those people that don't discipline your children, because that is a very bad thing, because your kids will become anxious and incorrigible sorts of adults if you don't provide them with some boundaries. But what we now know is that when you are doing this, providing those boundaries for your children, you have to do it in a way that is not shaming, is not punitive, and is not psychologically and physically harming to that child. Now, I know you're going to argue with me that spanking them doesn't physically harm them, but let me ask you, if somebody hit you, would you think that was physical harm? Odds are you would. I know I would not be happy if someone decided to hit me as a way to try to get me to do what they wanted them to do. I would think that was abusive. Even if it was just a small hit or a yank or yell, it would not feel to me respectful and loving. So it's no different if you're a child. Why do we think children are different than adults? And like someone was saying earlier today, is that, you know, that they spanked their children and it was very hard for them because they thought, why would they hit their child when they wouldn't hit their puppy, for example? If it's illegal to hit a puppy, if it's illegal to hit a horse, if it's illegal to hit an animal to try to get them to do what you want them to do, what makes you think it's okay to do that to an innocent little child? I don't understand. Yes, they have free will. Yes, they have strong will. Sometimes they have smart mouths. Sometimes they just are out not defiant. I had a very defiant young adolescent daughter myself. Not just from adolescence, from the time she was about 3, she was very outspoken and had her own mind about things. And beating her to death would not have changed that. She is who she is. So I had to provide those boundaries other ways. And that's what we have to learn as parents, is to be able to provide different kinds of boundaries for our kids. We have to learn to provide those boundaries through providing them with consequences that are logical or that are practical. So if there are things that are natural that will happen as a result, you don't necessarily interfere, unless of course it's life-threatening. That's a different subject. But for the most part, you allow them to take the consequences of their behavior, which is another side of the coin in terms of parenting, because I get a lot of parents that come in and they've got these teenage children and they've never really allowed to deal with the consequences of their own choices. For instance, they've helped them with their homework. They've brought their homework to school when they forgot it. They have done all their laundry for them all the way through high school. They've never taught them how to cook their own meals. You've never had them to do any chores. So as a result, these were kids who just thought everything was supposed to be handed to them, and they never learned the consequences of any kind of behavior. They could drop their things on the floor and somebody would pick them up. They could leave their dirty laundry on the floor and someone would wash them for them. And that is not how you create a responsible adult, obviously. But these parents wanted their kids to like them, so they didn't want to hit their children, and they didn't really know what the alternative was. And so what I'm trying to explain is that there is an alternative to hitting. There's an alternative to not providing any boundaries whatsoever. There is a place in between called providing structure through communication, through not interfering with natural and logical consequences where possible, providing logical ones where natural consequences either aren't available or are dangerous to your child. So there's a really wonderful book, which, you know, sometimes I think about writing a book on parenting, but I'm like, there's already a book out there that says everything that I would want to say. So I don't really see the point in writing it. That is, it's called Parenting with Love and Logic. And it's brilliant because it makes parenting so much less stressful. It allows you to not be the bad guy in your child's life anymore, but still provide the boundaries for them. And it seems really off the charts weird that you could do that, but it's entirely true that you can provide for your child options by providing them those limits and giving them ahead of time so they know what the consequences are going to be. It's not punishment. I'm not saying you're a bad child because you did this and then you're not being punished for it, but it's a logical consequence. For example, if you have a teenage child who's got a curfew and they're supposed to be in by, say, 10 o'clock, and they did not make it in by 10 o'clock, well, the natural consequence for that, and they're going to know this ahead of time, would be something like, well, you're going to have to be in by 9 tomorrow, the next time you want to go out, because you obviously couldn't manage to be in by 10. So the logical consequence of that is that you have to make it in by 9. And then, you know, if they continue to disobey those curfews, then they stop getting the privilege of leaving and going out in the ways that, so you see what I'm saying is that you can provide these boundaries, and by providing them with logical and natural consequences rather than through hitting. And if you're talking about a small child, there's lots of things you can do with them because they just you know, you don't have to yell at them. You just have to explain it to them. Here's your choice. You can choose this or you can choose this. Up to you. Here's the consequence to either one of those. One positive, one's negative, but it's your choice. I don't, you know, and then you don't have to get upset about it, because whatever they choose is up to them. And they end up feeling the ability to manage their own consequences and to have what's called an internal locus of control. Because when a parent is providing all the rules and showing and forcing them to do certain things, they're never going to learn that they have the power to make things better for themselves. And so when they are allowed to make those choices, and they can choose, do they want to wear this, or do they want to wear that, and do you want to have this to eat, or do you want to have that to eat, or do you want to not eat and then not get to have your book before bed? I don't know that that's necessarily a logical consequence, just came out of my mouth, but you'll figure out what those logical consequences are for you and for your family. And when you do that, it makes parenting just so much easier. There's no anger, there's no yelling, there's no fighting. They may not be happy necessarily with their consequence, but it provides you the opportunity to go, man, honey, I'm so sorry you made that choice. I can see that that's not a consequence that you wanted, and I'm really disappointed that you made that choice too. So maybe next time you'll make a different choice. It changes your relationship with your child. You no longer become the authoritative, controlling person that maybe you grew up with. And maybe you thought that was not so great either as a child, but you knew your parents loved you, so that's what you do with your children. The thing is that it is one way of parenting, but it's a way of parenting that, as we now know from multiple studies through thousands and thousands of children, that in the end produces children who have all kinds of different problems. Now, somebody on my page had said, well, what if it's maybe you're spanked 3 times a year instead of 12 times a year, which is what one of these studies was talking about. Maybe 3 times a year is not going to produce the same kind of result that 12 times a year would, but it's still a breach of that relationship. It's like saying to someone, well, my husband only hit me 3 times this year, so that's not a big problem, is it? Well, yeah, I think it is. And I think your children will experience it the same way. Whether you think so or not, it's teaching your children that violence is acceptable and that it is an appropriate way to get people to do what you want them to do. I hate that I wasn't able to get this up on my my personal page, but I do want you to put in your thoughts, and I will post some of those articles after this is ended. And I want to hear more, and maybe we can have more of a discussion about what this means to you. I know a lot of people are very reactive around this issue because, number one, their parents spanked them, and maybe they spanked their own children and feel that was the appropriate thing to do. And I'm not here to say it wasn't. I'm just saying that there might be another option. And that if you would consider it, if you're in the process of raising your children right now, I have it's 4 grandchildren, five grandchildren right now, and what I know is that none of those children are being spanked, and I don't believe that's necessarily because of me. I do think that they have done their own research on the matter and know that there are other alternatives besides spanking in order to provide those boundaries for your children. Absolutely, you do have to set the boundaries. I want totally reiterate that. Most of the time, the kids that the parents that come in with the biggest problems with their kids are ones that either they have had the controlling, authoritative, abusive sort of relationship with their child over the years, and now their child is rebellious, or they have the other end of the spectrum, which is where they did not provide them any boundaries and just gave them everything they wanted, and now they have a child who is entitled and unwilling to cooperate with anything. So either end of that spectrum causes major problems. And so when we talk about this topic, I feel like people talk about it from one end or the other, when really what we're talking about is beginning to move toward a center place where you can provide those limits without having to be abusive, without having to spank, which isn't always abusive, I will say that, but is always perceived as the child as a violent thing, because it is it is violence. When you hit someone, it's violence. There's no way around that. But that you do need to provide boundaries, clearly. So listen to what I'm saying, read some of these studies, and consider the possibility of doing the parenting with love and logic methods of teaching your children how to make choices for themselves so that they can have an internal locus of control, have power over their lives, make good decisions for themselves, and not end up being angry, abusive, anxious, depressed adults. And now, obviously, you know, there's a lot of you out there who will say, I'm not any of those things, and I was spanked. This may be true. And it may be that you just don't realize the difference that it would have made in your life had you not been treated that way. So just think about it for a minute and consider that you have no way to know what you would be like had you not been treated that way. And we now know, because of all the massive studies that have been done, that it is in fact better for children when they become adults. They become better adults with more confidence, less anxiety, less tendency toward violence when they have not been spanked. But when they have also been provided natural logical consequences, where they've been provided those boundaries, and that allows a child to develop into a more fully rounded human being. And that is the goal. We want them to be independent. We want them to be able to make their own choices. We want them to be able to understand the consequences of their behavior. And it doesn't have to be done through hitting. And I'm really anxious and looking forward to finding out what your thoughts are on this topic. I think we're just about out of time. Got a couple of more minutes here. So what I'd like to know is, if you were spanked, kind of, this is an informal survey, if you were spanked, if you spank your own children, or if you were spanked and you choose not to spank your own children, or if you weren't spanked but you spank your own children, that would be an interesting one. How you feel about spanking in general, and if you think spanking is always abusive, or if you think it's only sometimes abusive. Do you feel like spanking is just a normal, natural way to parent, and that without that, children don't have guidelines? And again, I just want to encourage you to consider that there are other ways to provide those boundaries, that really and truly there are other methods that are more effective long-term, and don't set your children up to be afraid of you. I personally don't want my child to be afraid of me. I want them to respect me and listen to me, because they recognize that what I'm saying to them, I'm saying out of love and out of intention to help them be better human beings, not because I said so. Although I have to admit that with my oldest daughter, there were times when I just had to say, because I said so, because she was so smart and so argumentative that there was no way around any other kind of discussion with her. But I do regret the times that I lost my cool and I did what my parents did, because I don't think it's an appropriate response to a child. For me, the times that I did were failings on my part. They were not anything that my child did. They were all about my own stress and my own inability to manage my stress at that moment. And that is absolutely the wrong way to punish a child. Absolutely the wrong way to ever spank a child. Because when you spank a child out of anger, you're much more likely to actually end up hurting them physically more than you want to, because you're losing control yourself. So I'm saying this to my kids, who some of whom may be listening. I'm sorry for those times that I did hit you, because now I realize, well, and I even realized at the time it was wrong. I just couldn't stop myself at that moment, and I'm really sorry. It wasn't a good thing. And I'm really proud of my children, because they did turn into these amazing adults who are raising beautiful children without the use of spanking. And I don't really believe that's necessarily my input. I think they understood that from their own gathering information about effective parenting, and chose not to do that with their kids. So thanks for listening, and I will see you next Monday at 4 o'clock. And if you can't find me on my personal page, look for me on Melody Brooke LPCL MFT page at 4 o'clock on Mondays. I'm also going to be on with the 4 at 4 on Thursdays, every week. Check that out and go to the 4 at 4 page and see some of the other posts from some of the other ladies that we'll be posting with. So I appreciate your listening in, and I'll talk to you next time.